fakes are about as old as photography itself. Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin all ordered that pictures be doctored or redacted, erasing those who fell out of favor, consolidating power, manipulating their followers through images.
They've always been manipulated throughout history, but there was literally, you can count on one hand the number of people in the world who could do this. But now, you need almost no skill.
And we said, give us an image of a middle-aged woman newscaster sitting at her desk reading the news.
Hani Farid is a professor of computer science at UC Berkeley.
And this is your daily dose of Future Flash.
He and his team are trying to navigate the house of mirrors that is the world of AI-enabled deepfake imagery.
Not perfect. She's not blinking, but it's pretty good.
For a quick hacking
And by the way,
job.
he did this in a day and a half.
Yeah.
It's the classic automation story. We have lowered barriers to entry to manipulate reality. And when you do that, more and more people will do it. Some good people will do it, lots of bad people will do it. There will be some interesting use cases, and there'll be a lot of nefarious use cases.
Consider what happened in May of 2023. Someone posted this AI-generated image of what appeared to be a terrorist bombing at the Pentagon.
Today, we may have witnessed one of the first drops in the feared flood of AI-created disinformation.
It was shared on Twitter via what seemed to be a verified account from Bloomberg News.
It only took seconds to spread fast.
The Dow now down about 200 points.
2 minutes later, the stock market dropped $500 billion from a single fake image. Anybody could have made that image, whether it was intentionally manipulating the market or unintentionally. In some ways, it doesn't really matter.
Trust, but always verify. So, what kind of AI magic is readily available online? It's pretty simple to make it look like you're fluent in another language.
我绝对不可能独自说出这句话。
It was pretty easy to do. I just had to upload a video and wait.
Es dauerte etwa so lange wie das Essen einer Bratwurst.
And suddenly, I looked pretty darn smart.
Αλλά στην πραγματικότητα είναι όλα ελληνικά για μένα.
Sure, it's fun, but I think you can see where it leads to mischief and possibly even mayhem.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Caitlin Sachs. I am a senior producer for Nova here at GBH. And what you just saw is a clip from Nova's 2024 film, AI Revolution. Now, what I really love about this clip is it makes the point that while generative AI is kind of like the shiny new technology that has everybody talking, it seems in multiple languages, manipulating information is really nothing new. That said, our internet-connected society has created an environment where false narratives have the opportunity to thrive on an unprecedented scale. So what does that mean for our vital institutions, like science, media, so many government organizations? Exactly how has the proliferation of false narratives and the overall decline in the quality of our information ecosystem undermined their ability to function? And more importantly, what can we do about it? That is what today's panel on losing trust is all about. And we have an all-star lineup of panelists tasked with helping us explore these questions. So I will invite them up right now as I introduce them. Leading the conversation is John Avlon, a journalist and author of Wingnuts and Lincoln, and the Fight for Peace, and host of the podcast How to Fix It on the Bulwark. He's also a former CNN anchor and political analyst, and was editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast. Naomi Oreskes is renowned for her best-selling 2010 book, Merchants of Doubt, on the origins of climate denial. In that book, and since then in her research and multiple other published books, Naomi investigates and exposes misinformation campaigns intentionally built to sway public opinion. Next, we have Renée DiResta. She recently authored the book Invisible Rulers, exploring how propagandists have weaponized the dynamics of influencers, algorithms, and online crowds to undermine trust in the institutions that make society work. She also, by the way, led teams investigating Russia's interference in the 2016 U.S. elections. Meg Marco is the director of the Applied Social Media Lab at Harvard University. With a background as a journalist, Meg is coming up with ways that we in the media can develop a trusted relationship with our audience. And finally, Matthew Facciani can shed some light on why it is that so many people believe these false narratives, because he studies how our brains work. With a background in neuroscience and psychology, he studies why we believe what we do and how the communities we belong to influence how we process information. So they have a lot to cover. So John, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you all. Good morning. This is a really important topic, losing trust, false narratives, and then importantly, what we can do about it. Why? Trust is fundamental to democracy. Democracy depends on citizens reasoning together. That requires a common set of facts. That's being undermined. Democracy also depends on an assumption of goodwill among fellow citizens. That is undermined by this tidal wave of misinformation and disinformation. With the conversation with some of the really world-leading experts today is going to be illuminating. We're going to focus on solutions. We're going to try to organize this in three broad ways. One, focusing on supply, right? Propaganda. The demand. Why are we so susceptible to this? And then the dissemination and what we can do about it. Let's start about supply. And Renée, we'll begin with you. We are seeing an unusual, propaganda has become pervasive in a way that is being weaponized by state actors, foreign and domestic, to distort our debates. Let's talk about that fire hose of falsehood right now.
So I guess we can connect it to what Hani was saying in the video that we just saw. One of the things that happens is when you create a new technological infrastructure, a lot of different types of people can become entrants into the market. So propaganda used to be something that required access to a broadcast infrastructure. In the age of mass media, you had to have access to perhaps a television station, a radio station, print media. You had to be able to either maybe establish front media operation in another country so that you could launder content through the way that Russia did when they created the fake story that the CIA had created AIDS, right? It used to take a long time, and it used to require access and infrastructure. And that came with a need for money. It cost a lot of money to do this and took a lot of time. But the cost to do that declined significantly, and that meant that a lot more people could do it. Even state actors like Russia can now do it by creating fake people on social media platforms. It is free to do this. You can take advantage of real unwitting influencers. We saw a fascinating case in which Russia was actually paying right-wing influencers like Tim Pool and others to simply propagandize for them rather than even bothering to do the work of establishing front media or fake accounts. We see domestic actors realizing that they too can do this. And what is really interesting, I think, and what I tend to focus on quite a bit, is the role that the audience that was previously a little bit more passive, just received the message, now plays quite an active role, both as creators and distributors themselves, because social media gives anybody the ability to create content, to share content, and to really participate in spreading messages that align with a political belief or an identity-based value system. And so you see many more people participating in that process.
And Naomi, you wrote a really important book called Merchants of Doubt. It was about climate change, the tobacco industry, basically the sowing of seeds of doubt to undermine scientific consensus. That playbook has become, has proliferated in ways that you probably couldn't have anticipated 25 years ago. What do you think about the weaponization of alternative facts by government, by this administration?
Well, that's obviously a really important and disturbing part of what's happening right now. I mean, it's bad enough when a corporation like Philip Morris or R.J. Reynolds spreads deliberate disinformation and undermines public understanding of science and medicine, and millions of people died as a result. But still, you could point out that corporate actor and you could say, this is a bad actor, this is a corporation that is willing to, wants to make profits at the expense of human lives. But when it's the government, when it's our government, then it complicates the issue so much, especially because so much of what I work on has to do with disinformation that is designed to undermine trust in government. It's designed to undermine trust in regulation that protects us from harmful products like tobacco or fossil fuels. And so part of the counter argument is to say, but government is an important tool. Government is a tool that we as citizens can use to pass appropriate regulations to protect public health and safety, to protect workers and the environment. But now when government itself becomes a major source of disinformation, it leaves people like me in the scientific community a little bit stymied as to what the argument is about what people should trust and how you judge what trustworthy information is. I used to be able to say, well, go to the NOAA website or go to NASA for reliable information about climate change. Now I'm like, yeah, let me get back to you on that.
CDC.
CDC. I mean, that's a profound and sort of sinister shift. We shouldn't sugarcoat that. Matthew, I wonder just from a psychological standpoint, how you understand the tribalism that is fueling this, what Renée was speaking to in particular, that this is not just coming top down anymore. It's coming bottom up because people's identities are wrapped up in propagating a certain version of, air quote, truth.
Yeah, so identities are critical. So we're all social creatures, and we have a motivation to get social support from the communities that we associate with. And these identities also give us a critical source of self-esteem. So we're motivated to act in ways that support our identities so we can get support from our own groups. And we may be more likely to listen to a group that we're associated with than another group that maybe we don't like, or we feel like they dismissed us or disrespected us. So it's important to consider how so much of the information that people seek out may be in relation to the identities that they have and how they respond to their environments by trying to seek out information that's consistent with their identities to support their self-esteem systems. So it's always important to think about, even just when someone is believing something that maybe we think is false, from their day-to-day life, it doesn't really make that big of an impact necessarily. You can even take an extreme example of someone thinking that the Earth is flat. Like if the Earth is flat or square-shaped or hexagon, it doesn't really impact their day-to-day life all that much. But if all their friends and family and community members are in that flat Earth group and they derive a lot of self-esteem from thinking of themselves as contrarians, for example, then that provides a lot of meaning and self-esteem. So from a psychological perspective, it makes sense why they would adhere to that one belief that provides so much self-esteem and meaning and social support, even if it's not based in reality.
And how do you short circuit that? I mean, are there certain sort of in-group persuaders that can begin to break that us versus them, what is essentially an us versus them dynamic?
Yeah, so having people that are connected to a group that's important to them is one way that you can reach them. So like having trusted messengers of a group that they align with. This is called reference groups in sociology. So if you think that the group you're with, it matters more to you if the message is coming from someone you trust and that you share values with compared to someone outside of your group. So that's why if you just yell facts at someone and you belong to a group that they don't like, it's not going to have that much of an impact. So we have to think about how the groups that we belong to, how they intersect with the groups of someone we're talking to. And more broadly, I think it would help if people have more diverse set of identities. So this is like big picture. As we think about how our society is structured, we're in these separate realities sometimes in these very narrow social groups where a lot of our identities overlap with each other. And that makes us especially vulnerable to believing false information because so much of our self-esteem is wrapped up in a narrow set of identities. So ideally, if we have a broader set of identities, we're less susceptible to misinformation.
Well, like we're all Americans, that would be helpful. But Meg, part of your research and work has been in sort of the way the amygdala gets triggered intentionally, right? Yeah. And how the outrage Olympics we live with every day is actually a way for scammers to get their claws in vulnerable folks. Explain that emotional reaction and sort of how to maybe push back against that.
Absolutely. So, a little bit of backstory about me before I started working in, building social media tools. I spent a long time as a journalist focused on sort of consumer issues and fraud and scams. And so I think there's like a lot that we can learn from looking at the techniques of scammers. I know that sounds like maybe not a good idea, but fundamentally, they kind of know what they're doing. And the first thing that they always do is they try to dysregulate your emotional state, right? And that could be pushing you in any direction. I mean, it could be fear, like, grandma, I'm in a prison somewhere, right, in the middle of the night. Or it could be hope. It could be like, oh, you won the lottery. You're like, oh, you just have to send me this and you're going to get all this money, right? So the first thing they try to do is they try to take you out of your normal regulated emotional state. And that makes you more vulnerable. It just does, no matter which way you go. So when we're looking at the sort of the information environment that we find ourselves in, we are so much more emotionally dysregulated by design, no matter where you are getting your media, no matter how you are getting it. I'm a journalist. I have spent a lot of time trying to make journalism that is important, very engaging, and emotionally dysregulate you so that you will read it and care about it. And I am guilty of this. And if it bleeds, it leads is a thing. But we also have to think about what that's doing to us and what that's doing to trust over time. So the scammers can teach us that lesson, if nothing else.
And that's so important to any of us in journalism, right? That's what a clickbait headline is designed to do. But the incentive structure said, well, if you want people to read it, you need to make the headline provocative or outrageous, and so that the incentive structure is fundamentally misaligned. Naomi, I wonder, just explain to folks the psychology of merchants of doubt, of how sort of how seeding that doubt and then amplifying that doubt leads people to identify with it and say, well, I'm a contrarian, and because it's very effective, sometimes with, often with big corporate dollars behind it, sometimes with ideological movements behind it.
Well, there's two parts, and one part is completely rational. So it's completely rational to think that if the science is unsettled, we don't really know the truth about something, then it makes sense to wait and see, do more research, and certainly you wouldn't want to change your lifestyle or spend a lot of money trying to solve a problem that maybe doesn't even exist. That was a line that was used by the fossil fuel industry in the 1990s. Why would you spend $1 billion fixing a problem that doesn't even exist? So that's not irrational. It's not an appeal to emotion or dysregulation. And so it draws people in because there's this core of rationality in doubt and what we might call healthy skepticism. But then it pushes it further, though, into the domain that Matthew was just talking about, the contrarian domain, where then it invites you to say, oh, I'm smarter than all those scientists. I'm smarter than those eggheads at Harvard. I've read this interesting thing that tells me about this glacier in Greenland that isn't melting. And so there's a lot of cherry picking of data, give you some example that seems to go against the bulk of the scientific evidence or the mainstream scientific claim. And then you could say, oh, but yeah, those scientists got it wrong because they missed this one particular glacier or something like that. And so then you feel superior. You feel like, look how smart I am. And then, as Matthew said, you have friends and colleagues who are now reading the same material. You reinforce each other's views, and you begin to have a sense of identity as a contrarian. And that's why it's really important to recognize that the folks who are attracted by that are not necessarily uneducated. They're not necessarily stupid. I mean, some of them might be, but by and large, right? And actually, there was a super interesting finding some years ago that among Democrats, more education leads to more acceptance of the science of climate change. But among Republicans, it was the other way around, which is a very depressing conclusion for a person like me who is an educator. That my Republican students will become more resistant to climate science if I educate them more.
No. I don't mean why.
Sorry.
I mean, what is the supposition for why that is the case?
Got it. I think it's about motivated reasoning. That if you're motivated to not believe something and you're an educated person, then you have a toolkit to help you you have a toolkit to help you find the information that you want. So more educated person, also more wealthy Republicans are more likely to reject climate science. You have the toolkit to find the information that you want that reinforces your views and your tribal identity.
Confirmation bias feels good. Motivated reasoning. Renee, you have an extraordinary book, Invisible Rulers, and I saw you nodding away when Naomi was speaking. One of the things that your book posits isn't just the mechanics of this sort of hijacking of a debate, and you really do break it down very ably. But you believe that in the solution space that there need to be alternative, what I call, amplification efforts to counteract. So talk about what that would look like. I mean, if you're trying to build a way to amplify facts so they speak as loudly as lies.
I was thinking about it's almost the opposite in the vaccine space, that it's actually educated liberals who are for a very long time more likely to be anti-vaccine for the same reason.
Yes. That's true.
So let's see. So I'll stick with the vaccine example because that's how I opened the book, but also how I got interested in this topic, which was just as a mom with a baby who was too young to be vaccinated during the Disneyland measles outbreak. So we had this very hard-fought fight in California. Ironically, we were fighting against Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who 10 years later, with the measles outbreak in Texas, is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And so I was an activist at the time. I was not an academic at all. I had a startup. And I was saying, why is it that 85% of people in California are still vaccinating their kids, but the social media conversation is overwhelmingly negative? And now we've got this measles outbreak at Disneyland, and when I go to look at the data sets to register my child for preschools or kindergarten, to look at the kindergarten data sets, California has excellent public health data. You can see the trends very clearly over a decade of this decline in vaccine uptake and the rise of personal belief exemptions. And what you see there is the growth of the anti-vaccine movement on social media and absolutely no engagement from the CDC or the institutions. They are not participating in the conversation. Ironically, Donald Trump is involved in the conversation at this time too, with a hashtag called CDC whistleblower, which alleges that literally the CDC is burning the documents that prove that vaccines cause autism in garbage cans in the basement of the CDC. And this is the most viral vaccine trend that is going viral on a daily basis, showing up in Twitter trends, as there is a measles outbreak in Disneyland. And the CDC is nowhere to be found in this conversation. They're not even defending themselves against this allegation because they consider it beneath them. Because if you respond, then you are feeding the trolls. And this is the prevailing thinking in 2015. And for me, as a person who is very much extremely online, I'm watching this happening and I'm thinking no, there's a void here and nobody is filling it. And so we actually created this group, me and a couple of other moms, we called Vaccinate California, and we're going to fill the void. We're going to be the pro-vaccine moms. And oh my God, was that I have a lot to say about that because we were doing it to fill a void. Oh, we got doxxed, harassed, my kid, people took pictures of my infant. I mean, it was a real interesting, it was my first rodeo back in 2015. I have had many since, but what we learned was that we were already 8 years behind in growing a pro-vaccine movement. Facebook was actively recommending anti-vaccine groups because that was what the algorithm had available to it. There was no, the debate about what was ethical to recommend and curate was a huge debate because are you censoring people by not amplifying their content? This is a topic that now is, again, very much in the news. And again, there's a complete void because the CDC is providing no content, the institutions are providing no content, so we decided that we're going to do it ourselves, just as fellow mom activists. And I remember we did get this bill in California passed after the Disneyland measles outbreak to eliminate the personal belief exemptions. It became mandatory. If you didn't have a medical justification, you had to be vaccinated against measles to go to kindergarten in California. That was the bill that we were trying to get passed, and we did. But that was for a very discrete moment in time. We did not have the funding, the time, or anything else to continue that afterwards, and so Vaccinate California effectively stopped after getting that bill passed. And what wound up happening, though, was I went to the CDC, and they asked us to explain how we had gotten this done. How had we done it in California? How had we managed to pass the first pro-vaccine legislation in America in decades? And we explain it, and I had these network graphs up, here's the data sets, here's what we did, here's how we strategized. And I said, where are you? Why aren't you in this conversation? And I said, don't you want to be participants? These people are forming their opinions based on what they're seeing online. And they said, well, no, they form their opinions in the end based on what they hear from their doctors and what they see on our website. And I was like, no, these are the influencers here. And they're like, no, those are just some people online. Mm. And then as COVID was coming, I was like, okay, we're still here. Anyway, I've talked long enough, but that was my That was my experience. So if you're not participating in the conversation as an institution, if you are not an institutional communicator, if there are not grassroots movements that are funded, if there are not networks of amplification, then the social media algorithms have nothing to curate. If the authoritative voices aren't in the conversation, then there is nothing to push back. It's not magic. You have to just do it. You have to invest the time. And so you see all of these graphs and charts where people are like, God, look at the right-wing bubbles over here. Look at the influencer, the size of these audiences. That's a product of a 10-year investment, and they just chose not to do it.
So, Matthew, I mean, let's just talk about the psychology of this, because one of the lines about people in the center is that very few people take to the streets and yell, "Be reasonable," and but more should, by the way. But the psychology of this is that, understandably, to put it another way, I think this is old Lyndon Johnson political aphorism: you don't wrestle with a pig because you get dirty and the pig likes it. But that doesn't apply in today's online world, right? The game changed. The conversation has moved away from official channels. So from a psychological standpoint, how do you convince people to get engaged? Because if they flee the civic space, the bad guys win.
Yeah, I mean, I think the incentive structure plays a big role. So if you're an academic or you belong to an institution, you might be disincentivized for even speaking out in a public forum sometimes. Right. So that's a big part of it. Just the psychology of being attacked online doesn't feel good. If you hold up a sign, "Be reasonable," you just get obliterated by both sides. So that's why there's a lot of research showing that moderates tend to self-censor a lot, and we see the most extreme voices on the left and right be amplified because they can find their groups that boost their thoughts with their own algorithm. So it's really tough to actually get people to speak up in those spaces. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the more socially responsible social media, because I feel like the psychology is important, and it's important to think about that, but also the incentive structure and the structures that we have in place are also really important too, because that plays a large role on just if people are even willing to invest that time when they're going to be attacked so brutally. So I think it's a broader conversation of both the psychology of how it feels to try to speak up, but then what does it look like to actually participate in these systems online?
So Meg, I mean, he just gave you an assist there, but I think especially as a former journalist, there are a lot of sort of restraints that are put in by sort of people trying to be responsible that are asymmetric, right? We've got unilateral disarmament. So what's your advice and perspective on that from a journalistic perspective? Right? What mistakes have journalistic outfits made that have eroded trust? And then what's the right way to respond in these debates without dragging everybody into the gutter?
That's a really good question. I think that one thing that journalists are really good at is blaming themselves for everything, which is also narcissism, if everything is your fault.
Academics do that too.
So I just want to say we did do some of the things right, like fact checking was good. Mm-hmm. And I think having a bundle of things with high utility, with very trustworthy information, and even some ads for some deals you can get, and then also some nudes, like a full package of stuff that would come to your house that have a variety of perspectives in it. That was a good way to establish a relationship with an audience. And I think you all know what I'm talking about when you say that we don't really have that anymore. Local news doesn't, you don't really have that sort of daily visit to your house from that. So, it's an uphill climb when, we have to package everything important in the sort of veneer of emotional dysregulation in order to appeal to an algorithm that'll get set to aside. I mean, if you think of the plight of the local news, in order to get targeted to their local area, they would maybe have to, put the place name in the headline, which tanks it in the algorithm, right? That's not going to work. So there's a lot of things that journalists are trying to do to adapt, and we're a very game people. We're ready to be digital. We've been ready to be digital for my entire career. So there is that. One of the things that we're doing at the lab that I work at is we're taking a little bit of a step back from assuming an algorithm. And we're saying, what types of affordances, technology, LLMs, like what have you, can we add to social interaction that is going to scale a face-to-face communication, to scale a local group, to allow people to have the sort of stand for being reasonable with a group of folks and not just always go to a dysregulated place. And is that social media? I mean, we would say that it is, right? We don't necessarily assume that as coders and as designers and as product managers and journalists that we necessarily have to recreate the exact systems that we have in order to get to some place that's a little bit more productive and actually social and a little bit maybe less media. So that's what our focus has been, and so far the reaction that people have had to it is really very positive. And also we have a private beta test, so if anybody wants to, try such a platform out, hit me up.
But I mean, but you mentioned two really important things I just want to hit on. First of all, the death of local media is a real danger to democracy. Donald Trump won 91% of news deserts. And it's not just there's a lack of credible local information that exacerbates this idea of the us against them with journalism, right? That it's an elite preoccupation as opposed to Dave down the street doing his job. But also it means that people are more likely to go down the rabbit holes of their phones. And that creates the alternative reality. So the challenge for citizens is to support local journalism. For patriotic philanthropists, it's to help fund local journalism through foundation and grants and other things. But Renée, one of the, we've talked a lot about the dangers of media capture, and it can happen slowly and then all at once. One of the things that you have been involved in calling out is the way the algorithms have become weaponized and the fact checking has become, neutered in effect. Talk about just that systematic process, and then how to fix it. I mean, what are the algorithm reforms that we could pass that might help and increase transparency and accessibility?
So it's kind of a tough
question.
It's big. Since the topic of the panel is trust, I think it's important to note, as a few people have up here, the erosion of trust is not only accidental. Oftentimes it's quite deliberate, right? It's very deliberately undermined. And sometimes the erosion of trust, particularly in media ecosystems, happens as a function of marketing. You can think about this in the context of Fox News positioning itself as fair and balanced in opposition to mainstream media, but also coding itself quite clearly as they lie to you, we tell you the truth, right? And then when you see the rise of what I call niche media, and I call it niche media because rather than appealing to mass audiences, which is what broadcast kind of had to do, or that was just how the infrastructure evolved over time, one of the things that algorithmically mediated content creators have to do is they have to appeal to very particular niches. That's how you establish an audience. That's how your content gets pushed out to people. That's how you begin to grow. So you are not incentivized actually to appeal to a very wide swath of an audience. You're incentivized to appeal to a very particular niche. An identity-based niche is often a great place to start. A political identity, perhaps, a particular very niche interest area. And then maybe you expand out from there, but you really are incentivized to appeal to a niche. And as a result, what you'll see happen, particularly in political niche media, is they are attacking not only mainstream media, but they will be attacking other representatives of their niche. You think about it as like in ecology, you have to eat the other fish in order to kind of maintain your spot in the pond. And so the incentive structure there means that one of the things that starts to happen is as social media platforms, particularly during from 2018 or so till about 2023, begin to put a series of fact-checking and other types of information contextualization programs in place. They do this in part in response to fake news, prior to that term being redefined to mean news I don't like, but fake news, incorrect stories trending and going viral quite a lot in the 2015 to 2017 timeframe, what you see the platforms do is in response to public pressure and outcry, particularly from the left, in 2015 and in that timeframe, you see them build this infrastructure for fact-checking and contextualization. And it is professionalized, and many of the outlets that provide the fact checks are mainstream media. So what this provides is an opportunity for outlets on the right to allege that those entities are biased against them. This, again, is partially marketing. But what happens is, as this becomes highly, highly politicized, particularly around the 2020 election, is that politicians like Jim Jordan and others begin to say, not only are they biased against us, but this is censorship. And once they attach that moral opprobrium to the enterprise of fact-checking, once they link it in the right-wing mind, the right-wing audience mind, with censorship, they delegitimize the very enterprise itself. And once you delegitimize that enterprise, what you see, the reason Mark Zuckerberg walked that back after the 2024 election is because now political power has shifted and it has become a liability for him. That infrastructure that he put in place when the left appeared to have more power is now a problem for him today. So you have to understand that it is very much a political act. That is why it was done. But what can you put in its place? The idea of a community note where the fact-checking is crowdsourced, and so it theoretically is coming from somebody like you, has a higher degree of legitimacy on the right than mainstream media providing the fact check. It's seen less as like the elites telling you what to think, and more like people who are like me are potentially writing this fact check also. And so that's where Zuckerberg is moving into. It is essentially, it is simultaneously both a useful technique. Like, I actually like community notes. I've been a supporter since Birdwatch rolled out the program in 2022. It is a good thing. It is a thing that we should be doing, but it should be supplementing. Like, these two things are actually things that are quite complementary. They should be operating in tandem, because there are certain things where a professional news organization or a journalist or fact checker is better equipped to get at the facts, and there are certain things where an ordinary person just sitting on their couch can write that fact check just fine, right? And oftentimes what you'll see is the ordinary person will go and will cite a media article to write the fact check. So this is like a contextualization ecosystem. So I think you have to recognize that the reason this is happening is because of a very deliberate delegitimization campaign. But in order to have anything that adds contextualization to information on a social media platform, this is the best option in the moment. And that is, unfortunately, where we are.
So everything from as sinister to the idea of fact-checking as censorship to a hopeful note on community notes. And I'll say the positive side of AI, occasionally you see Grok on X fact-checking Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's actually surprisingly good.
Sort of a troll, but kind of fascinating. And it's a self-inflicted one. All right, Naomi, talk about, merchants of doubt are successful for a time. People can die. We can lose progress in combating slow-moving change, which could be catastrophic. But ultimately, the tide turns. Maybe not the best metaphor in that case, but you work with me. What are the techniques? What are the strategies that have been particularly effective in combating these merchants of doubt?
Well, I think it's a hard question to answer in a way because of Matthew's point that different narratives, different arguments will be effective with different communities. But what I found most in my own personal experience is exposing the lie for what it is and exposing it as a con. That this is basically a con. If we think about the tobacco case, which is the most well-studied, these were corporations that made trillions of dollars selling products that killed us, but tried to persuade us that they were just fine. Mm-hmm. That was a con, and we were at the losing end of that con game, and we, the American people, got sick and died. And in my experience, nobody really wants to be the sucker at the losing end of a con game.
Especially when you have the receipts.
Correct, exactly, which we do. Right, and so that's part of the importance of the work. So I spend a lot of time doing a lot of detailed work. And by the way, it's not 25 years. I'm old, but I'm not that old.
No, 15.
15,
I'm
yeah,
sorry, 2015.
Okay.
15 years old,
yeah.
2010.
Yeah. And especially that can feel very out of fashion right now, to spend the time to do the hard work, to spend 5 years writing a book. I mean, who does that anymore, right? But part of the reason why we feel that it is important to do this work is because we do have the receipts. And we can show people, we can show them the story, we can show the examples, we can explain how it works, who these people were, who was paying them, what media outlets they used, what techniques. And then when people see that, it's kind of revelatory. In the film version of Merchants of Doubt, we had a magician who was kind enough to do something that magicians almost never do, which was to show how a trick worked, right? So if you haven't seen the film, I hope you will. And it's just astonishing because the trick is so unbelievably simple. And when you see it, you think, what the heck? How did I fall for that? And so it's a similar thing with the argument about Merchants of Doubt, that once you see it, you realize, no, I don't want to fall for that again.
But it also underlines why it's so important to have investigative journalism, and that is expensive. And the ROI in a media environment that's being starved for funds is very unclear. How many pieces a year are you going to get from Spotlight, right? But democracy can often depend on it, because otherwise you can't just wait for discovery in court cases, and then hopefully they get amplified. All right, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to focus really on the solutions piece of this. Matthew, the hardest thing is to fix our frail and fraught human brains. What are the psychological tricks or techniques that are helpful in building a movement from the vital center as opposed to the tribal appeals of the far left and far right?
Yeah, so as I alluded to earlier, our brain and ourselves, we have this motivation to interact with groups and get a lot of social support from those groups. And that's a really great thing. There's a lot of great benefits from having this self-esteem from these identities. The issue is whenever our identities are so concentrated and overlap with each other so much. So in order to broaden our identities, we could interact with different groups of people. And of course, that gets tricky because our society, especially here in the US, we don't have a lot of third spaces where people can actually meet different types of folks. So it'd be nice if there was actually places outside of work and home where we could meet different types of people. I think that'd be helpful. But as far as the other part, as far as trust, trust is social as well. So trust is relational. People are more likely to trust people who they view as competent, but also if they think that they have your best interest in heart. And I think that's a really critical component too, because if someone feels dismissed by a particular group of people or an institution, they're going to seek alternative sources that make them feel heard and validate those identities. So spending time and effort to build trust from a relational standpoint, I think is really important for all types of institutions, media, science, and health.
So also hyperlocal gives us hope.
Right.
The more practical things we can do with our friends and neighbors, getting outside of our respective bubbles. Meg, put on your journalistic hat. I know that, because the podcast I do right now for the Bulwark, How to Fix It, is solutions journalism. And this is something that studies show can help restore trust in media. That if people feel like you're not just piling on the problem, but you're offering a solution, even though some journalists feel like, then I'm getting prescriptive, it can restore trust. What are some of the techniques that you think can restore trust in the journalistic space?
So I started out as an advice columnist. So I would help people with their consumer problems. They needed to get a refund or something bad happened or whatever. And that's really informed all the other stuff I've done through my career, and I've moved into investigative stuff. And I sort of took a customer service approach to it. And I would just recommend that to everybody, is to really think of yourself as a customer service rep for democracy. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's what you are. And what do you need in order to do that? And you need to be able to your point earlier, get in there and interact and not be above the fray. And that's something that is hard to do because it exposes you to lots of personal attacks, and it can be really, really unpleasant for you personally to do that. Every journalist knows this. But I can't say enough about how important it is to have that personal relationship with your audience, and to think of what you do as a service, and to make that happen, in the publication that you're working in, and also on social, and, just bring that as much into the local environment that you're in, even if that local environment is virtual. I think it's important for all of us to think about design challenges that we have as people who are trying to put forth trusted information, and also develop a relationship with an audience where they feel like they trust us to tell them things that they don't want to hear. That's what I always tell people about, like, you know, how do you choose a good news organization, or how do you choose where to get your information? Find someone that you trust to tell you bad news that you don't want to hear.
And don't just preach to the choir. Yep. All right, Naomi, we'll go to you next, and then Renee last. So what are these? Be prescriptive. Choose news organizations right now. How can news organizations do a better job in restoring trust and puncturing lies?
Well, I'm an academic, not a journalist, although I've
written
written some journalistic things.
You've written for a lot of outlets.
Yeah, no, I have. And I think, I really liked what
you could do academia if you want. I mean, you could have universities.
No. I really liked what you said, Meg, about taking so much responsibility is actually a kind of narcissism. I think there's a way in which we can really get it. Like we make this about ourselves, and it's not about ourselves. It's about our role in the community, the society we live in, and I love the consumer service rep thing too, because that's how I always think about my work. I think that at the end of the day, everything I do is service. And I always feel like in academic life, we talk about the 3 legs of the stool, research, teaching, and service, but we always treat the service piece as if it's kind of like the least important. But in a way, I think everything we do, why do we do research? We do research because we think it serves society. Why do we teach? Because we're serving our students. And I think if we could bring that service ideal forward more in an authentic way, not just, I'm great because I'm doing service, but really think about what is the service role, and not just talk about it, but act it. I feel like that could be helpful.
But Renee, if a tree falls in a digital forest, nobody hears it. Mm-hmm. So what are, you've written, and I really recommend Renee's book, but everybody's work and podcast here, but you've written about, some tools the government has used in the past. There's the Active Measures Group, came up in the Reagan era in the late Cold War, the IPA. But just to distill it down, if people are trying to amplify fact-based debates over misinformation and disinformation, who's doing it right? What tools and techniques would you recommend? And then if someone is serving in Congress or the Senate, is there a bill that could add a degree of reasonable regulation and transparency on the algorithms that would help take us out of this morass?
The one thing that anybody can do with any expertise in any field is edit Wikipedia. And I think that people really neglect this. I cannot stress enough how important Wikipedia is to the information ecosystem, right? Wikipedia trains AI. It is where your answer engines come from. Like, wars happen in Wikipedia entries, and for some reason only one side seems to recognize that. It makes me crazy. And it is not the elites. It is not the institutional elites, because again, journalists aren't like, let me make sure that the facts in that story find their way into Wikipedia. Academics absolutely in no way are thinking in those terms. That also makes me crazy.
Interesting.
Because there's no incentive, because you're not, your publication record is not tied to whether your stuff winds up in Wikipedia. But that is where one of the things that we have a really big problem with is like the goldfish problem. There is no through line. People cannot keep track of the stories that they hear. We were talking about this before coming on the panel. Like, when you do these deep one of the reasons for books is that you can tell the story. You can highlight what happened over a 2-year period. When people read one article in the Washington Post and they think, man, this sounds really bad, and they don't realize that those same characters have appeared in like 10 other stories that came before, because nobody has bothered to synthesize that knowledge or connect the dots and put them into any one place, a lot of the context is lost. So I think that really, honestly, Wikipedia and places where contextualization and like negotiated facts happen are actually critical to participate in. And then as far as the government, everybody wants the government to do something. I'm not even really a libertarian so much as just a skeptic that they actually pass anything at this point.
Reasonable.
But we've advocated for a while now for things like the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act. Really, really basic stuff. Platform data used to be much more transparent, and that was because X or Twitter then, and Meta, Facebook, all of them were voluntary participants because, again, as I mentioned, prior to the recent election, prior to transfers of power in 2022, they saw it as being in their interests to be voluntarily compliant, to be good citizens, and to share that information with researchers and others. They don't see it that way now, and so they don't do it anymore. or they have significantly rolled back what they make available and how it is offered. And so self-regulation in that regard we have seen just does not work. And that's where I would say it is pretty foundational to understanding problems to have the data available to researchers to assess those problems. If you want to know if the right wing is being censored on social media, you should have that data available so that conservative researchers should go look at it too. This is not actually a partisan issue. Transparency is simply foundational.
There you go. What an extraordinary panel. Citizens need to take responsibility, and we need to adjust the incentive structures. Thank you.